Hi, and welcome to the Vocal Brush Podcast, the podcast about linguistic discrimination.
I'm Megan Figueroa.
And I'm Carrie Gillen. And, you, David.
I like your impression. Carrie is referencing my beanie, toque, right? Toque in
Yes.
Canada. It says you, David, because I bought it from the Schitt's Creek shop, the merchandise shop. And I'm wearing it because a lot of you will find it embarrassing, but the temperatures are now like below 90 degrees. So I'm just like, it's time. I'm cold.
Well, last night we watched a movie outside and, it dipped below 70. So, I put on a sweatshirt.
Yeah, and the low in Tucson tomorrow is going to be 39, so that's real. Like, ooh. I think a lot of people would find that cold.
Yeah, definitely 39 is cold. Yeah, for sure.
So, I mean, I will not be anywhere near the outdoors when it's 39 degrees. That's probably like 4 a.m. or something, where I will be tucked into my bed.
Yes.
But to be fair to me and us, well, not so much you, because you can tolerate cold better, probably. But I can tolerate 115 degrees. My body can.
Yeah, you're much more prepared for heat than I am.
Yeah.
I can handle cold a little bit better as long as I have proper clothing.
That's true. At least with cold, there is clothing to help with that. There's nothing you can really do about 115 degrees.
Right. And taking off clothing can actually be counterproductive, at least if you're in the sun. You need the clothing to protect your skin and like keep you a little bit cooler. But
yeah, that's why people that work outside, you'll see them in long sleeve like white shirts and stuff. It might be counterintuitive, but that's how it should be. Okay, so the fact that it's almost going to be 39 degrees one night in Tucson soon means that it's winter.
That is winter.
It's almost November.
Oh my God.
We made it.
It's flown. We made it almost to November.
Flown and also quicksand. It feels like quicksand, yes. Right? Eventually it takes you.
Yes. It's very slow moving, and then eventually you're on.
Yep. You're there. You're wherever.
Wherever quicksand takes you.
Yeah, I have no idea.
Anyway, the whole point of this is that we're like just over a week away from the election.
The U.S. election, if anyone happened to be under a rock, which, let me join you, please, under that rock. I don't want to know anything that's happening. But our episode today is...
It's kind of about the way that Trump uses language.
Yes. And his rhetorical style, right?
Yeah, his rhetorical style, his like choice of topic, just the way he manipulates language to manipulate us. Yeah, so it's basically all about Trump. So it's all Trump all the time. So apologies, but
yes. So take care while listening, and it's just an amazing guest joins us Absolutely. To talk about that. So definitely recommend listening to it, but also take care because fuck that guy. But speaking of also, so someone tweeted out during the last debate. So this is probably about Trump, we think, since the timing. The tweet by CJ Pasco says, "I really appreciate complete sentences." And so, okay. But first, before we talk about that, Sylvia Sierra, a fellow linguist, retweeted this and with the comment, "No one speaks in complete sentences. This is a language ideology that doesn't reflect reality. People speak in utterances. Sometimes these coincide with sentences. People write and read in sentences."
And it's easy to complain about the way Trump talks because he is very meandering. And he'll go from one thought to another thought and like just expects you to follow along. And unless you're like deeply ensconced in his worldview, it's not always that easy to follow his train of thought. But if you're ensconced in it, if you're fully like Fox News up or ON up, then it's really easy because you know all the things he's saying.
Yeah, you know all the threads. Right. Yeah. So, yeah, I don't even know. I'm not in it. I can't even give an example.
Well, so during the debate, a lot of what he was talking about were things like, Hunter Biden's emails, but he wasn't really all that specific about what was in the emails. probably because there's nothing really that bad in the emails, and so it's like really hard to like be specific. He's also not that great at being specific in the first place. He just likes to make these sort of generalizations that you're supposed to just be like, oh yes, corrupt. That person's corrupt. Like they don't have to know why, just that they are, right? So, but he also couldn't remember the name of the guy that he brought to the debate, who was supposedly Hunter Biden's like partner
in crime.
I was gonna say in crime, but then I'm not sure they actually did anything. But you know what I mean,
right? No, like that's what he thinks. It's his partner in crime, quote unquote crime.
Right.
Yeah.
So, but he couldn't even remember the guy's name, so he couldn't even like say it. So it was like kind of interesting to watch, just him like try to like throw shit at the wall, but like in a more ineffectual way than normal for him.
Right. And so the idea behind the original tweet is that, picking on that, he doesn't speak in complete sentences, and this is a mess, and there's some sort of disconnect between like being capable or being intelligent or being good at X and speaking complete sentences. Like he's not there, so he doesn't have that. He's not capable. And there's so many fucking reasons why Trump is not capable.
Well, he actually is, because did you listen to him talking to Woodward in the tapes about the coronavirus?
Yes. I guess he does seem a lot more with it in those.
He spoke closer to what a full sentences would be, what we would consider to be a full sentence. Like he spoke like a normal human being in those tapes, and it's kind of shocking to hear him talk like a normal human being, because we're so used to this meandering speeches that just go every which direction, and he doesn't really ever say anything concrete because he doesn't want to be pinned down. But he can if he wants to.
Yeah, but again, normal people don't always speak in complete sentences. That's not the point there.
We very rarely do.
Right, yeah. And I just think so many people are picking up on the fact that like TV anchors and podcasts that are professionally produced by like NPR or whatever, the host will talk in complete sentences. It's because these things are scripted. They're reading a script. If you notice, that's not always true in the interviews.
Right. The questions might be, but the answers aren't. And so we're capable of talking in sentences, but we generally don't. And if we do, it's usually because something has been pre-written, or we're saying something really simple. This is a sentence. Something like that.
I agree. See? Another sentence. Yeah.
We can, but we very rarely do. Very rarely. So,
right.
Yeah. But I think what people are picking up on is that most people who have speeches, their speeches are prepared. They're pre-written. They've had speechwriters pour over them to make sure like every word is perfect. And Trump doesn't do any of that. So he just violates all these norms. And so I think that's what people are picking up on. And we can talk about whether that's a bad thing or not. I think it's kind of both, depending. But it has nothing to do with anything else, with his character or his intelligence or anything.
Yeah, and again, we've talked about this before, so people will say something like, I can't wait for a president who speaks English or whatever. So these type of comments are harmful because ultimately they're not going to affect people like Donald Trump. Other people are going to get harmed by this because the ideology will be passed on that like people who don't speak in complete sentences or, who speak like him, whatever, in whatever way you think that is, are the problem, when in reality, that has nothing to do with if they're capable of X or whatever.
Right. Also, he speaks English. It's not the issue.
Yes.
Like, I hate when people say that because it's like, really? Why does that matter so much to you? I mean, obviously we want a president we can understand. I get that part, but he obviously speaks English.
Yeah.
Ugh.
Yeah. Yes. So I know. I mean, there's so many things to rag on about him. Just pick one. Why does it always have to be about how he talks? He does it on purpose. He's communicating to his base beautifully, isn't he? Like, they know.
There are ways to critique the way that he talks. It's just, it should be more about, like, how is he trying to manipulate us?
Yes, like we talk about today.
Like he doesn't complete a thought. Why is that? Not that he doesn't complete a thought, because that happens to all of us, but why does he do it all the time?
Yeah.
It's because it's on purpose.
Well, yeah, I'm thinking, how many times did I not complete a thought in this intro? You know, like, it happens all the time. We stop and we go on to another thing if we, you know, our brains are faster than us talking. So
Than our mouths.
Yeah. Yeah. So,
yes.
Why did he trail off? Is it because he realized he was about to say something that, I don't know, would undermine, I don't know, you know. Exactly.
No, because he wants the hearer to fill in the gap so that he doesn't have to say the thing. So if you can't fill in the gap, then you're not part of his space and he doesn't care about you. But if you can, you're probably part of his space. And it's like, good, you're on the same wavelength.
People speak in incomplete sentences all the time. It has nothing to do with your intelligence or ability to complete X or your whatever. I mean, whatever we've tied on to this idea that people must speak in complete sentences. Because again, I think a lot of people might believe that and not want to be actively harmful. It's just, you know, something that,
of course,
you know, we might pick up from, like I said, TV and podcasts and speeches and
I do want to make this clear that I think the reason why people are upset comes from a place that makes some kind of sense. Like, Trump is being manipulative, right? When he does this trailing off thing where he switches from topic to topic without really saying anything concrete. So, like, he's being slippery. And so people are upset about that. But they don't understand that that's what it really is. So they just misascribe it to, oh, he doesn't speak in complete sentences. Like, as if those are the same thing. And they're not the same thing.
100%. Yes.
So the reason why people are upset is totally understandable, but they're just not getting the actual reason right.
Yes. Agreed.
And so then it perpetuates these harmful things, and that's the only reason why we care. We just don't want people to be perpetuating harmful language ideologies.
Yeah, because it's gonna live on past Trump and past. Yeah, past
of course
Trump.
It will. Yeah.
So that's the problem. That's when it becomes a problem, like a true problem. Because I ultimately don't care what people think about Trump, even if it is.
No, yeah, it has nothing to do with what they think about him.
Yeah,
it's totally about what it means about what you think about language in general and what you think about people who speak language in general.
Exactly. Let's go on and talk about Trump a little bit more.
Yeah.
Like this show and want to make your own? Let me tell you about Anchor. It's free, and they have creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer. And now you can even add any song from Spotify directly to your episodes. The possibilities are endless for what you can create, whether it's music analysis, your own radio show, or something the world's never heard before. Anchor will distribute your podcast for you so it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and many more. And you can also make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. It's everything you need to make a podcast in one place. So download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started.
So we're very excited today to have Dr. Norma Mendoza Denton, who is a professor of anthropology at the University of California, Los Angeles. She is best known for her book, Homegirls, Language and Cultural Practice Among Latina Youth Gangs. She publishes on language and politics, youth, migration, and visual cultures. She is also co-editor with Janet McIntosh of the new book, Language in the Trump Era. Thank you so much for being here with us today.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, so why did you want to edit this book? Why is language so important in the Trump era?
Trump was elected. And when that happened, I, after watching the run up to the election and the kinds of discourse that were being used there, a group of scholars, basically me and Janet McIntosh, decided to put together a panel at the American Anthropological Association meetings, and that resulted in this volume. So we had the people who were originally on the panel, plus some people that we thought would be really great to have tell their side of what they think is happening.
So is there anything unique about this era? Like, is Trump unique in his use of language? And if so, how? And if not, like, what other people are using the same kind of rhetoric or language?
Okay, well, let me just start within the U.S. Trump is not unique in his use of language. He's just, in a sense, the crystallization of a lot of different trends that we've been having. And you might recall Sarah Palin was running for in the vice presidential ticket, and before her election, she had put up a map of the U.S. with crosshairs onto the map of where different opponents were. And soon after that, gunmen shot Gabby Giffords in Tucson. And so I think that, this kind of incitement to violence actually wound up galvanizing a lot of people. And at the University of Arizona, there's a National Institute for Civil Discourse where we were trying to talk about this whole phenomenon. And it was sort of a scary time because, as you know, Tucson is it's not exactly a sleepy town, but definitely, it's a place where people were not imagining that such a thing could be happening. Fast forward 6 years later, or even now, like 8-10 years later, you have people yelling, get them out, send them back. So this is all a kind of evolution of the civility and discourse going way downhill over the last 15 years. And I also remember when President Obama was heckled from within the floor, that one of the Congress people yelled, "You lie!" Right, and that kind of, I could see it in the House of Lords, but we don't really have that behavior in Congress. So that was a bit of a shock, right?
Well, also when Governor Jan Brewer, when he got off the plane and she was wagging her finger at him.
And at that time, that made headlines.
I mean, the picture was the front page.
So I'm telling you, what goes in Arizona comes up later.
Yeah, and you were at the University of Arizona, just so listeners.
Yeah, I worked there for a long time.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we have a special Arizona sisterhood.
Yes, exactly.
Happening there.
Absolutely. So you say he's not unique, not even in the U.S. What about beyond?
Yeah, well, beyond, we see this type of really discourse that suppresses others. We see it all around. I'm just going to point most directly to Jair Bolsonaro of Brazil, who constantly is saying things about, especially I think he has a special disdain for LGBTQ people. And so he's constantly making statements that are both meant to highlight his own heteronormativity and to put down anyone else who might be even a little bit different, that is racially, socially, or in terms of gender or sexual orientation. And this is something we also saw in the presidential campaigns of Vicente Fox in Mexico. And to some extent, there are other leaders that have also fixated on their own masculinities, like Vladimir Putin is a famous one with the horses and the swimming not naked, but swimming bare-chested in all of that stuff. It's like, and so I'm really excited to have in the book a piece by Carol Cohn that talks about missiles and masculinity and talks about being inside one of those meetings where nuclear power is being discussed by people who have the power to use it, and how it's really just a game of, who has the biggest one, and all of these innuendos about nuclear warheads, which you would think is just, wow, really? That's what it's about?
Childish, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, this is a very important thing that affects the lives of many, and this is what it boils down to, this childish game. Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, it's a downer.
I mean, the last 4 years have been a downer, right? At least.
Oh, yeah, every day. Slightly worse every day. Sometimes more than slightly.
Yeah, I know that your podcast, it's about linguistic discrimination. And yesterday I saw something on the news that I thought I would bring up in your podcast because it's a really important thing. And in the Journal of the American Medical Association, the open forum that they're having now for research on COVID-19, there was an article, and I think it was coming out of University of Washington, that looked into language diversity in terms of patients and their ability to get care and their diagnoses. And so what they wound up finding was that if you speak a language other than English, you have much worse outcomes in terms of being diagnosed, being treated, length of time, worse death rates. I mean, it's something as innocuous as just having another language in your repertoire. But and we want to say, of course, it's connected. And I think the worst languages that they found the worst outcomes for were Eritrean and Cambodian and Spanish. And so you think about minority communities that are in so-called essential jobs, which really are essential, but we don't treat them like essential. All of these communities are much more exposed to COVID-19 infections. Their infection rates are higher, and they have a harder time accessing care. So, and when you sort of pull on that thread and trace it back to President Trump, you'll notice that on one of his first acts in office was to take down everything that was in Spanish on the White House website. Any kind of linguistic diversity is being, I think it's under attack. And so, of course, we can expect that the outcomes for linguistically diverse populations are going to be just much worse.
Yeah, we have an interpretation access issue too. We've talked to a couple people on this show about that. I was thinking that Trump is able to use the language of patriotism to say that if you speak Spanish, it's not patriotic, basically. And he's been doing that since, when he announced his candidacy, basically by attacking Mexicans. I think that, he's able to just kind of talk about a thread. It's been there the whole time with his attack on Spanish and Spanish-speaking populations. And it's not letting up. He knows that his base is they really get into that kind of rhetoric, I think.
They do, but I think he also likes it too.
Oh, he likes the rhetoric, you mean? He likes to attack Spanish and Spanish-speaking populations. Of course. Yeah.
I think sometimes we forget that it's not just about his base, it's about him. But, so speaking of Spanish, you talk a little bit about it in one of the chapters, the chapter that you write, We Latin Americans Know Messianic Autocrat When We See One, but you talk about it more in previous work about Trump's use of mock Spanish. So what is it? What is mock Spanish, and what does it signal about his attitudes towards Latin Americans?
So mock Spanish is a term that was coined by the late, great anthropologist and Arizona professor, Jane Hill. And Jane Hill's work in this area has been extremely influential. And I want to say that she came along and put her finger on something so present that it was almost like the phenomenon had been there all along, just waiting for her to come by and name it. So mock Spanish is when somebody uses Spanish in a way that's not exactly correct, and that is meant to portray them in a kind of elevated light. So it's something that's at the same time pejorative of the people that are using it, as well as it elevates the speaker. And that's really interesting. I guess in that way, it can be classed with like languages of politeness in a way, or self-elevation, right? It's a variety of language that implies something about the speaker and the hearer. Now, the really interesting point about this is that it's often used in the US in a jocular way. So people are supposed to be sort of jokey and cool. And Hill's best known example is the "Hasta la vista, baby," from the by now really old Arnold Schwarzenegger movie, The Terminator, where right before he blows off the head of the super evil, I think, android villain, he says, "Hasta la vista, baby," and he like blasts the head off the thing. And so in this way, you have this sort of mock Spanish being used in a kind of exaggerated way. It's exaggerated in terms of its pronunciation. So it has a kind of hyper anglicized pronunciation. It's exaggerated in terms of its utter lack of agreement and disregard for actual Spanish grammatical rules. And it's also used in ways that will make the speaker seem kind of cool. And so when Trump uses it to refer to Mexican people, he will, like the whole bad hombres thing. And Adam Schwartz is another scholar who wrote very beautifully on this. So the hombres is, at the same time as it's supposed to elevate Trump, it actually uses masculinity to put Latinx men in their place. Right? We're going to go after these bad hombres.
Sorry, doesn't he actually pronounce it like hombres?
Well, that was a whole thing on Twitter, right? That Twitter was like hombres, hambres, like meaning hungers, or hombres, like really bad dyes of the hair. So that was going on Twitter for a while. But this hombres thing didn't go away. And he kept using different words in Spanish. He sort of let up on that a little bit now, but I think for a while it was really productive. I don't know if you guys have seen any of his latest ads in Spanish that are just, they're really full of misinformation. And the Washington Post has branched out to have its own like Spanish fact checking in Spanish for Spanish speakers about these ads. I wanted to say that James Slaughter within the book has a beautiful article on the incoherence, the coherence of the incoherence of Donald Trump, and points out that one of the things that happens is that when people read tweets that he's made or they hear him talk, it needs a kind of exegesis. Like we have to have a side-by-side explanation of what on earth is this? What is he referring to? What are these words? Like, is this real or is it a dog whistle? Who is he calling out? Are we being gaslit? Like, there's so many questions that one has after a speech. It's an example of how you can never quite take what he says just at face value. Like, it always needs investigation. And this is extremely tiring I do this for my job and it's tiring for me. I can't imagine the public trying to keep track of it just, besides their daily routines.
It's on purpose too.
Yeah, I was going to say, I'm thinking about, okay, so if this is supposed to be a democratically elected president, we shouldn't have to think about whether or not we're being gaslit, if this is a dog whistle. All of these things that should not be part of a democratically elected president, right? That sounds more like a dictator or, like other types of leaders that we aren't supposed to have in the U.S.
You mentioned that his use of mock Spanish seems to have diminished somewhat in the most recent past. Why do you think that is?
Well, I'm not exactly sure why that is, but often in linguistics you have the evidence of evidence, right? Not the evidence of lack of evidence. So I can't say why he's ramped that down. But one thing that I can say is that he's been injecting other kinds of linguistic acrobatics into his speeches, right? I don't know if you might have heard a recent speech that he gave in Minnesota, where he said to people he had a big crowd, and he said to them, "So, how are the refugees working out for you?"
Oh my God.
Right? How are those refugees? You people in Minnesota have really good genes. It's all about the genes.
Oh, right. I did hear this.
Right. So in this sense, that particular discourse thread of genetic superiority has not let up. This is something that he's talked about for a long time. He continues to talk about it, and in the latest, he's trying to limit even foreign students from Africa to 2 years in the U.S., right, which is not enough to finish a degree.
Anything.
But be that as it may, this hasn't actually passed yet. Like, it's still in comments mode. I don't know what's going to happen with that. But in this vein of like, you have good genes, you're in Minnesota, we only want people from countries that, we want people from Norway, not people from Africa, from the shithole countries. In this vein, I think that the implication of refugees said in this really sarcastic way, as we know, for linguistics, sometimes intonation is a very difficult thing to try to capture when you talk about it. Certainly when you recall it. So I can imagine that, how are those refugees working out for you? If you just type it out and put it in a newspaper, it has a very different effect, very different pragmatic effect than hearing it. So how are those refugees working out for you? Because the sarcasm is really audible at the first pass by a native speaker, but it's definitely plausibly deniable.
Yeah, he's really good at the plausible deniability.
Yeah. So Adam Hodges talks about that in his chapter about, what it takes to have plausible deniability, and what it takes to be just on the edge of having said something that you might have to take back. And then again, he has methods for taking stuff back too.
Jennifer Murcia has a book all about his rhetorical styles, and he'll say, "I'm not saying the thing," and so you're supposed to just accept it if you're on his side, but think, "Oh no, he didn't actually say it," if you're not on his side. He's very slippery. In your chapter, you discuss how Donald Trump's speeches as president provide many examples of narratives of masculinity, where he promotes himself as the pinnacle of virility, strength, toughness, and whiteness. So can you explain what you mean there?
Okay, so there are moments in his speeches where Donald Trump portrays himself in this kind of strict father mode. And this is something that George Lakoff identified a long time ago in his work in Language and Politics. So you have the Democrats being the indulgent, loving mother, and the Republicans being the strict father figure. And I don't know if you guys have been getting the unsolicited emails from his campaign, but I don't delete them because they're data.
Yeah,
of course.
Data.
And in these emails, they come from him, from Guilfoyle, from Lara Trump, from all these people are supposed to be the originators. But often they will say something like, "My father hasn't seen your name. My father is asking about you," right? Really triggering anybody who has a father. And I think that, when you go into the body of the email, it will say, "My father was looking over the rolls of donors and he found that you were not there," and in red, "What is happening, Norma?" So there's really some very overt call outs where you have this sort of masculine power figure that many of us have grown up with, right? A father figure who is, projecting masculinity and is, possibly has some degree of control over you when you're a kid. And at your most vulnerable. So by kind of interpolating these father images, I think it gets him a long way. But the other thing that happens is that he will play on the protector image. Right? I am going to protect you, especially if you are a woman in the suburbs. We wouldn't want our beautiful young blonde girls to be sliced and diced by these bad hombres, right? This is what came up in 2016. We the slice and dice by immigrants. The fallacy there is it rhymes, so it's true, right? But now this, fast forward to now, and this has become, if you are a suburban housewife, I'm going to protect you because you don't want your neighborhood being overrun by BLM protesters or by these bad criminals coming from across the border. And or terrorist organizations or what have you, so he'll conjure up a threat or something that he thinks people will be threatened by. And then he will make that about gender and place himself as the powerful male figure who's going to protect the women from this, right? I wasn't sure whether this was going to keep going, the whole I'm going to protect the ladies thing, but it came out quite clearly both in his own speech as well as that of Ivanka Trump. Both of those speeches at the convention, the Republican National Convention, were largely about protecting these vulnerable women who just happen, white women happen to be a voting bloc that he really needs. So
he sure does. What did she say, actually? Because I did not watch any of it. I couldn't bring myself to do it.
Well, fortunately for you, I watched the whole thing.
I thought you might have.
I actually live tweeted it.
Did you?
Oh, nice.
Yeah, and I will be live tweeting all of the debates as well.
Okay.
Yeah. So one thing that she does, and this is actually also done by Melania Trump, is they enable him by doing a boys will be boys kind of routine, right? They enable his gender stuff. So one thing that what Melania Trump said at the time of the grab him by the pussy incident was, it's just boys' locker room talk. So Melania Trump excused it by saying boys will be boys. And at the Republican National Convention, Ivanka Trump got up and said, we all know that not everybody agrees with my father's speech style, right? But, you will agree that he wants but he's trying to protect you. He wants your best interests. And the whole protecting the women thing is coming back up, right? And, I encourage all the listeners to go out and look for themselves. If you're curious about something that Trump has said, there's a wonderful resource called FactBase, factbay.se. And it's a compendium of everything he's ever said, tweeted, videoed. It's searchable. And so you can yourself check up on, is this something that's recurrent that I've been hearing and it's just, or, what is happening with this? And of course, this hopefully will be the tip that launches 1,000 papers on this, because the more people that can analyze it, and especially members of the public who might not be students or professional linguists, we all have a linguist in us, and I encourage everybody to get out there and look for themselves and look to try to see what kind of discourse you're being fed.
Okay, so one of the things you talk about is he talks a lot about all of his stories have crying, not all of them. A lot of his stories have crying in them. Like this masculine, super masculine man comes up to him, and suddenly they start crying, and they've never cried before they were a baby or since they've been a baby. Why is he so fixated on crying?
The part about the fixation that actually needs a therapist. So
Yes.
Since I'm not trained on that, I can talk about the pattern, but not the why.
Yes. What is the pattern?
Okay, fair enough.
I mean, one suspects that there are some father issues there that he has, and based on his own relatives' accounts of their childhood, there have to be some pretty strong father issues happening there. But the thing about crying, and he actually mentions this, that in his autobiography, that he never cried as a kid, and has many accounts of his brother crying. But for me, I think that the crying part is an integral part of shoring up your own masculinity, and of trying to say something like, I am so overwhelming a presence that other people cry out of a kind of devotion.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, the scary part, is that it's not just masculinity. He's elevating himself to a reach where he's almost godlike.
Well, remember when he pointed to the sky? Yeah, he does this a lot, where he makes himself out to be some kind of god figure.
So at some point you have to stop and say, okay, so we know that there's all of this pattern of him talking about other people crying, and you can easily look this up on FactBase, right? You can look up anytime he says somebody was crying, you can trace it yourself, and I encourage listeners to do that. But the thing that you have to think about is, okay, so we know that this is a discourse pattern that we are being fed because it recurs, right? And he's skillful at picking out, I'm imagining a menu of different things that he's trying to put across. And this is very common, right? It's very common for politicians to tell repeated stories and adjust them slightly depending on the audience. And this is something that, that Jim Colby was doing. So it's a common thread for politicians. One way that we know that this is packaged, and it's packaged in just so a way for us, is that Ivanka Trump also talked about it in her speech for the Republican National Convention. She talked about, I've watched my father go in with the workers that are working in our buildings. This time it was workers working in our buildings and Trump Tower, whatever. And they just, they have tears running down their faces. And she even does the same gesture. I mean, it's striking, right? How packaged this is for us. So, just in case people were thinking like, maybe he did have more than one run-in, more than one encounter where people did cry. I can't be there to say whether it happened or not, but I do know that the objective occurrence of this pattern is that it's being packaged for our consumption, to portray him as somebody that moves people to tears in a kind of fervor.
So I wonder, I've been thinking about this. Whether it's right or not to use the word narcissistic to refer to someone if you're not sure if they actually are. A lot of folks who study language and who don't study language have used words like narcissistic to describe him. Do you think that they might be picking up on this kind of packaging, this kind of elevation to godlike status, the kind of virility that he, uses and makes himself very masculine? Do you think that's what we're picking up on when we feel that way?
Probably. We don't have a linguistic, this is not my area, but my mom used to make fun of me for saying this.
Not my area.
Because anytime she asked me a question, I'd be like, not my area. Done. But it's not my area, but I'm still going to say that although we don't have a linguistic litmus test for narcissism, I will say that almost in every appearance that he makes, it's about self-elevation. Yeah, Sylvia Sierra and Natasha Shrikant have an article in this book where they talk about the ways in which when he goes into a meeting, other people are paying homage to him. So he'll go into a meeting and people feel forced to say things like, I'm here from, the Black Voters Caucus, and you're doing such a great job. And then he'll go into a meeting and assign turns for everybody to praise him. And only then will the meeting start. And yet just today in the news, there was an article that showed that somebody who received an award, a federally funded award, and didn't praise him, criticized him, had the award rescinded, a woman, right, who criticized Trump. So you can easily see there that I don't know what the criteria for narcissism would be, but I do know that every interaction has to be about elevating Trump. And hombres is part of that too. Bad hombres is part of that, right? I'm elevated with respect to these men. I'm elevating America with respect to these shithole countries, right? So there's no one that's safe from this comparison where he's going to come out on top.
No, that is absolutely true. There is no one that's safe. And that's part of the reason I do not understand why everyone is so willing to throw themselves in front of him and let him run all over them. I understand that argument about the framing and how effective it is, and yet there's a part of me that's still how are people falling for this?
Yeah, I mean, some commentators have theorized that the divide between Republican and Democrat is so large that it would go against your own identity to go against Trump, right? If you're a Republican who holds a particular set of values, the identity threat is so big that you don't really have a choice. I mean, there will be voters who will never accept AOC or Ilhan Omar or anybody like that, right? And I think that when there are racist comments and Trump is continuously outed by his staff for them, then you have to just sort of think, okay, not everybody working around him can possibly be cut from the same cloth. So some people are just swallowing their pride and voting for their identity over, and this is actually probably also what happens with religious people, right? Who in their private lives wouldn't sit next to a woman, but in their public lives have to defend Trump. Calling out Mike Pence here.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm not even talking about the voters. The voters are going to vote how they vote. I just mean more Pence subjugating himself to Trump in this way, or Lindsey Graham, crawling, basically it feels like crawling on the ground for him, and then he just gets trampled on by Trump, and I'm like, how do you not see that this is a toxic relationship? But it is the identity thing. I sort of understand that.
Well, yeah, I saw my first Republicans for Biden sign when I was driving the other day, and it really makes sense to me. You have to change your identity. This is now a new identity that you're putting on if you're gonna be a Republican for Biden, kind of thing.
Yeah, it's a huge realignment of the political sphere, for sure.
I wonder, what would you say to someone who says, "Oh, they're just words. It's just language. It's not. How could it possibly be harmful?"
One thing I would say would be take a look at what happened to Gabby Giffords. It's not just language. Language incites action, and language creates our reality. Okay. When you have an administration that says, "Okay, COVID, COVID is an issue," where the official line about this is that it's not airborne, right? And then you have the sort of guerrilla scientists that are trying to say, wait a minute, it's airborne, and they publish an op-ed, right? That's the only way that they can get this out. They publish an op-ed, and then somebody at the CDC puts it up for a second, guys, it's airborne, and then pretty soon, bam, it never happened. Right? When we have our top authorities muzzled, it's not just that it's just words. It's also about the words that can't be said. It's about the reality that is being manufactured for us and fed to us. And each one of us has a responsibility not to take it at face value. And I think for me, that's I had a chance to write a very small piece for an immigrant newspaper in Florida called El Paracaidista. I love the name, right? The parachutist. And in this piece, I was trying to say, it's all in Spanish, but in the piece, I was trying to say to fellow Spanish speakers, watch out, your vote is really important, and people are trying to create reality around you. And I think that for me is the most important part of it, that language shapes reality. The things that you are allowed to talk about, climate change, that suddenly disappear from the White House, our official organs of communication, have, you can't talk about critical race theory. You can't talk about climate change. You can't talk about oppression. You can't talk about whiteness. Now you can't talk about airborneness. All of these things are, small ways in which your reality and your future is being gambled on.
And going back to what you said about how Trump, one of the first things he did was remove Spanish from the White House website. I mean, that's literally removing your access to words and language that might have important information for you.
Although maybe less so now.
I mean, right. It'll tell you that it's not airborne, right? That maybe you don't need that information. But yeah, that's such a clear-cut example of how this is actually, how words can be life or death. I mean, that information, not having that can kill people. It is killing people.
The people, I mean, honestly, the information is out there and people are claiming it's a lie. So there's only so much you can do because they have been so propagandized at for so long.
Yeah. I sense some disinformation fatigue.
That is exactly.
Yes.
But I think it's just important to keep at it, right?
I do have some disinformation fatigue like Carrie does. I got used to have, I think like a lot of people weren't used to having to pay so much attention to our president and what the president is saying and all of this. And I get that, but we really need to.
For me, it's also just that these people are so brainwashed. I can't even have a conversation with them. You know what I mean? So it's just like, okay, I'm going to keep yelling at my friends. Because for a long time I was yelling at my friends about COVID. No, you got to take it more seriously. No, it really is airborne. No. So I'm happy to yell at them. But like people who are like fully into the Trump zone, I do not have the skills to talk to them. Other people do, and they should. I support that.
I am really happy to talk to everybody because I think that in some ways, the way that a person votes is they're going to vote with their own conscience, with their own identity, with everything that they bring to the table. And it behooves us to respect their concerns. So I think for me, I feel very happy when I have the chance to talk to people who speak and think differently. But I also think like I gave a class talk recently in Kentucky, and the questions were so good. The questions that people had for me were so good. In fact, I had an amazing question from a Latin American kid who said, do you think that the reason that Latinos can vote for Trump is because we have had so many messianic autocrats? And I was like, wow, yeah, probably we're more susceptible. Who knows? But yeah, that's a great question, right?
Yeah, so speaking of that, what is a messianic autocrat?
Okay, so a messianic autocrat would be somebody who takes power, either elected or coup or whatever, and fashions himself as basically the Messiah, the one person who's going to stand between you and total chaos, right? And so I think that it's pretty clear that the president fits in this description right? Because he's constantly saying, I am the one. I am the only one who is going to stand between you and a Black Lives Matter protest where they're tearing up your neighborhood and doing all this stuff. I'm the only person who's going to stand between you and this immigrant hordes, these invaders. And shout out here to Otto Santana's chapter where he and a group of his undergraduate students went all the way to the Supreme Court with an amicus brief talking about how the Trump administration sees immigrants, right? They analyzed something like 3,000 speeches and 6,000 tweets to look for patterns of how Trump understands migrants as disease, as terrorists, as invaders, as problematic. Cockroaches, yeah.
Well, this is such an important edited volume. I'm so glad that we were able to talk to you about this and encourage everyone listening to pick it up. I wonder, do you have any last words for our audience or any last messages or anything you would hope for them to take away from this?
One thing that I would like the audience to know is that no matter how the election turns out, the power is in your hands to turn the discourse around. Right? I think that in some ways the damage has been done. This cat has been let out of the bag, but it's in our power to be kind to each other, to be civil to each other, to let information flow in ways that are not always undermining, our experts and the people that we are hoping will actually tell us what's happening with the environment and with disease and the world.
Thank you for that. I've been feeling really hopeless at different intervals of hopelessness, but it's good to feel hopeful,
Yeah, not at all. And I think it's so important. I know we are all in disinformation fatigue, especially on the run up to the election. It's so important to reach out across perceived difference. I think that, I'm still an idealist in this way. I want to talk to everybody. And I think if we all just equip ourselves to have these cross-cutting conversations, maybe it's naive, but I want to believe.
Well, even if it is naive, I do think that some people have to try. I do think that if all of us give up, then nothing happens. We're going to split into two at the very least, right? I just don't have it in me.
No.
It's not for me. Anyway, so thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
And we always leave our listeners with one final message.
Don't be an asshole.
Don't be an asshole.
Oh, very fitting.
We would like to thank our newest patrons for this month, Casey, Ricker Dockham, and Jasmine Diaz. Thank you. The Vocal Fries podcast is produced by me, Carrie Gillen, for Halftone Audio. Theme music by Nick Granum. You can find us on Tumblr, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at VocalFriesPod. You can email us at vocalfriespod@gmail.com, and our website is vocalfriespod.com.